In truth, everybody runs around every day talking about truth, and they're trying to get to the truth, and they want to hear the truth. That's one of the biggest lies I've ever heard in my life.
Soldier, keep on marching on. Head down till the work is done.
Most people have no desire whatsoever to even get within 100 miles of the truth, and in some instances, that's too damn close. So my conclusion is, most of you are going to get exactly what you're going to deserve over the next who knows how many years. Some of us are going to rise to the occasion. We are going to shine. We are going to shine. We're going to sparkle like diamonds in the sunrise on the most beautiful day that you can remember that you've ever seen in your life. And we're going to do it simply and only because it's the right thing to do. For the human race. For God. For our children. For the future of this world.
Keep on marching on. Head down to the
And it won't matter what happens to each of us as individuals. The only thing that will matter is that we rose to the occasion. We sparkled. We did what was right when no one else would. We said what was right when no one else would. We spent our money for the right things when no one else would. We worked and toiled the cause of freedom when no one else would. We took the slander. We took the libel. We took the bullets. We took the prison. We took wounds. We took death. We took whatever was aimed at us. And we will prevail. It may take a long, long time. I may not see it in my lifetime. I may not live to be a part of the victory celebration, but I will be victorious. But all of those with me will be victorious. And we will shine. You all stand around and talk about it. We put on the armor of God a long, long time ago.
You're listening to the Vonu Podcast, the podcast making you invulnerable to the coercion of the state and the servile society. Visit our website for free resources to aid you in your pursuit of self-liberation, old Vonu publications, podcasts, guest articles, and much more. Go to VonuPodcast.com. And now, your hosts, Shane and Jason.
And welcome to the Vonu Podcast, the podcast making you invulnerable to the coercion of the state and the servile society. I'm your host, Shane. Today I've got the next installment of our Building the Second Realm re-release over here on TVP. This one was titled Lessons from Organized Crime and was originally published on March 25th, 2018. So, much like our recent episode on, the Chaz, or I guess it's called the Chop now. I haven't, honestly, I've seen some of the stuff that's come out over the past week or so. But anyway, just like as that with the deemed autonomous zone, there's stuff to learn from that for anarchists. Just as there are lessons to be learned from organized crime as we go forward and build our second realms. So the show notes from that episode read: most everyone is familiar with organized criminal syndicates, whether it be the mafia, the mob, the yakuza, etc. They are typically viewed as violent, chaotic criminal organizations, constantly under attack and surveillance by the federal government. The latter may be the most truthful accusation leveled, but believe it or not, there is a lot libertarians and anarchists can learn from organized crime as they build second realms. This is something none other than Murray Rothbard recognized, in addition to Smuggler and XYZ, the authors of Second Realm Book on Strategy. Not only have these organizations existed for centuries, but they have flourished. They have their own internal arbitration systems, private defense and security. They utilize temporary autonomous zones to make them more invulnerable to coercion, and they have similar ethical and moral codes that are strictly adhered to. A sort of parallel society, to put it another way. It's worth noting that, of course, as strict as some of their moral and ethical codes may have been, they still participate in behavior that violates personal autonomy. We are not overlooking this, but rather honing in our focus on the relevant material. Please check out our sponsor, Liberty Under Attack Publications. The website is libertyunderattack.com. Until July 5th, all online orders are 20% off using the coupon code PORKFEST. And I will just say, please bear with me on shipping. It's taking about twice as long to receive books from my supplier, and I've heard it's taking additional time on the receiving end too. And I will also mention that my book, Vonu, A Strategy for Self-Liberation, is available for free download in Kindle and PDF format until June 23rd, so for another 4 days. If you'd like to pick up a copy of that, just visit libertyunderattack.com/Vonu book. Again, libertyunderattack.com/Vonu book, and you'll see the links for paperback. You'll see the link to purchase in paperback, as well as the download link for a PDF and text format. So thanks so much for tuning in. Please enjoy this newest installment of our Building the Second Realm series. Until next time, guys. See ya. Today's installment of this series is titled Lessons from Organized Crime. In Smuggler and XYZ's book, Second Realm Book on Strategy, they have a section devoted entirely to organized criminal syndicates, such as the Yakuza, the Triads, and motorcycle gangs. Believe it or not, there's a lot we can learn from them as we begin to build our own Second Realm. As the authors state, it's worth noting that these organizations obviously partake in highly unethical activity that violates the autonomy of others. We are not overlooking that. Rather, we're just honing in our focus on the relevant aspects of these organizations. So, Kyle, anything before I dive into these excerpts?
Yes, at some point during this episode, I will bring in Murray Rothbard, who is very big at, and maybe a lot of people don't understand this about Dr. Rothbard, but he would at least occasionally bring up the importance of comprehending and understanding why different organized criminal syndicates behave the way that they did. And then, of course, he would kind of relate that back to the state.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, looking forward to hearing about that. I've read a lot of Rothbard, but never come across anything of his regarding organized crime, so I'm looking forward to your enlightening me on the subject. So let's get to it. Again, this is Second Realm Book on Strategy by Smuggler and XYZ. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And if you're on this is episode 11. So if you have not read that book yet, you kind of need to. I mean, you've listened to all the episodes in this series, and you're obviously finding it valuable. Take a couple hours and read the book in one sitting if you can. I highly recommend it. But anyways, quote, organized crime groups. Everyone knows the Italian mafia, the Yakuza, Triads, and outlaw motorcycle gangs from news coverage. What is often overlooked is that these organizations are not simple chaotic gangs, but often exhibit a long history in their own kind of society. The Mafia, as an example, is primarily a loose-knit network of independent gangs that pay tribute to their dons and receive protection and their own conflict resolution system in return. Their aim is to limit conflict within groups and not resort to violence when other means of conflict resolution are available. They operate their own title system of territories and markets, they provide services for communication and reputation, and they foster the division of labor through specialization. One could define the Mafia as an organized crime business association based on a shared ethical background, end quote. So we'll talk about the Mafia here. Certainly an interesting way to introduce the subject, but they are correct. Smuggler and XYZ are correct that, they definitely did have their own conflict resolution systems, their own titling, their own private security, those sorts of things, and those would definitely be crucial to Second Realms, as we've talked about before, and we'll talk about more in the future.
Yeah, and it's interesting they mentioned about having a shared ethnic background or whatever. I don't know, man. I think this is one of those times I actually want to impersonate like a stereotype or whatever. The social justice warriors, because they always claim that everyone needs to be tolerant and all that. I can totally imagine seeing one of the SJWs saying something to the effect of, well, those organized criminal syndicates like the Mafia should be like more tolerant of people who don't share their same ethnic background. I mean, I could totally see that happening.
True. Yeah, but it's ethical background. So it's ethics. Ethics is the background.
Ethic. Actually,
ethical, not ethnical.
Okay, to be fair. Well, okay, fine, fair enough. But actually, I guess you could also interpret it the other way, right? Because you have the Italian mafia, the also somewhat equally Italian Camorra. What was the other one that was mentioned? The Yakuza. Those are the Japanese. Triads are Japanese, or excuse me, triads are Chinese. So yeah, there actually are certain ones that are ethnically homogenous. But yes, to be fair, the book did say ethical background. So yes, yes, I did misread that. However,
Still applicable.
technically. See, yeah, they're both applicable, whether it's ethical background or ethnic background. Both are still applicable. And yeah, it's just kind of like it is something to kind of keep in mind. So I know, like, if the totalitarian, conservatives, if they ever, got around to getting like everything they ever wanted, then yes, of course they would more likely than not probably get together in certain communities that have very restrictive covenants. And more likely than not, they would probably be more ethnically homogenous than not. So, even the conservatives who might be willing to break away from the state once they, stop with their political crusading for Trump and all that, trumping.
Right.
Yeah, once they stop trumping, and I think that should be a verb, trumping, i.e. politically crusading for Trump on behalf of Trump, being an apologist for Trump and all that, trumping, trumping, trumping. Once they stop trumping, then I don't know, maybe they too can learn some things from like organized crime, and they can have their ethnically homogenous communities that also are ethically inclined and so forth. So there's your little pun.
Hey, who knows? Who knows? All right, let's get to the triads. Similarly, the triads are built on ethnicity, Han Chinese, and sharing a cultural narrative, resistance to the Manchu rule. They've been around for centuries, mostly by establishing an integrated society and trying to limit their activities to inter-triad conflict, exploiting street criminals, and focusing on less public crime.
Told you so.
And yeah, end quote. We'll stop there for a moment because they kind of changed the subject a little bit, or not change the subject. They just I guess generalize more. But that's interesting. So they exploit street criminals and focus on less public crime. That's interesting. And would that be considered a crime? I mean, these criminals, depending upon their crime, if they violated autonomy, then they've been dialogically stopped, and therefore, is it really a crime to steal from? Oh, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah,
to kind of look at the I guess the ethical implications here in regards to the non-aggression principle and ownership and things like that. So I need to look more. I should have done this before this episode, obviously, but I need to look more into organized crime because it seems really, really interesting.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like that infamous line from that movie Charade that had starred Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn, I think it was, that infamous line towards the end of the movie when Cary Grant's character mentioned something about, well, is it really a crime to steal stolen money? Yeah, that's actually a very good question. Is it really a crime to steal stolen money? I mean, obviously, I know what the deontological answer to that would be. You're right, you shouldn't do it in the first place. But yeah, it's, for a lot of people who may not be necessarily philosophically consistent, or they're having their ethics being tested with very hard decisions they have to make, which will ultimately kind of determine whether they really are practicing what they preach and all that, then yeah, organized crime would be one way of testing ethics in a pretty decisive way, isn't it? Is it really
organized victimless crime?
Yeah, well, that's another way of putting it too, right? Depending on the nature of the business. If we're talking, I mean, obviously, like extortionist.
Well, actually, no. Agorism would be well, actually, no, it wouldn't be organized because it's all spontaneous and individually based. Never mind. Backpedaling. Go ahead.
Well, but then again, hey, your run-of-the-mill agorist might have to do some black market deals with some of the Yakuza. You never know. Depending on business context, depending whom the suppliers for certain goods and services may or may not be. I mean, you never know. I mean, if it's black market, it's black market. But unfortunately, but to be absolutely clear on something, organized crime, if we're going to go into Agorist, the Agorist theory of the five markets real quick, the organized crime usually tends to be more red market activity, those activities that are immoral and illegal. But then they'll also do the black market activities too. Which are those activities that are fully outlawed and banned by the state, but which are ethical to do, and so forth. But then, of course, the servile society likes to jump in and basically say that the red market is the black market, and then they call everything red and black market and label it all, well, it's all black market. So because they don't understand economics, they don't want to make a distinction between black and gray markets. They don't want to make a distinction of even the pink market, which is the legally allowed but immoral activities which are sanctioned by the state, like taxation and conscription and compulsory registration for selective service and 1,000 other things which are legal but yet repugnant. Taxation probably being the least important one. It's just kind of like it's what it is. You know what exactly it is? It's all emotional, reactionary crap, kind of like what happened here locally in town with that was in the news cycle just a little bit ago that I only heard about at work. The package fellow who supposedly was gunned down, or actually he wasn't even gunned down, even according to the official story. He was he basically did a suicide type thing where he blew himself up in his own car or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And literally, no, I was on duty when that happened. And people were coming in basically, oh, God, there were so many bloods in the friggin' hotel. No, you don't understand. Feds were there, like, as customers.
That's a scary situation to be in as an anarchist.
No
yeah.
shit.
Yeah, I was and just as a little tangent, tweeted. All right, I didn't tweet out. I posted on a fascist book. This would have been on Sunday. There was a Second Amendment rally here in Decatur, but they held it right in front of the police station. So I put out this Facebook post like, so here's what's going on. You think it would be valuable for me to go and interview some folks? And then I just made kind of the comment. The main reason I'm really probably not going to do this is that it's right in front of the Bludgy station, and that's not a good place for an anarchist to be. Definitely not in the vein of security culture. So I decided not to go. I decided to write some of my book instead. But yeah, you're in that hotel with shit hitting the fan in Austin, at least to some degree, and you've got feds and you've got local bludgies and you've got all these folks there, and you're just on duty.
They're all well, actually, ironically, I was all dressed in black, historical libertarian color, kind of like how monarchists are the whites and of course the commies are the reds. I was all decked out in black, and it was just kind of like, oh God. But yeah, and it was funny when people were starting to come in a little bit right before little bit side tangent, right before the shift change. So this would be about like 6 something in the morning, like less than an hour. I have to go. They were coming in saying, yeah, we heard the guy he's dead. That's good. And then one of the bludge who was armed, he was walking around, and the head maintenance guy was like, hey, you got him. And the other guy's like, yeah, we got that son of a bitch. And all I'm thinking is, la, 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 due process, la, la, la. Can we get his side of the story? Oh, wait, that's right. He's conveniently dead.
They always die. They always die. Yeah.
It was funny. The only person who was halfway reasonable was ironically my boss, who was relieving. He left at about 10 something 11. And that was during that earlier shift change when I started. And he was like, dude, I think I see like drones outside. I'm like, hey, seriously, just take 5 minutes and show him. He's younger than I am. He's always on Reddit whenever I come to relieve him. So I guess he's a millennial, I suppose. But yeah, he showed me, and you know what? I honestly don't know what I saw, except I saw the same thing he did, where there was like weird blinky lights out in the distance. I thought were helicopters. He thought were drones, but they weren't very loud at all. So there was some stuff floating up in the sky at night with blinky lights that didn't act like a plane, and now that I think about it, didn't act like a helicopter either, although that was my first guess. So there was something floating up there, so maybe he was right about something. So my boss is freaking out, and everyone else at the hotel is like all backslapping each other about how they, how the so-called law enforcement basically killed some guy. Or wait, no, they cornered him and then he committed suicide. Sorry, that's the official story. It's just, Jesus. And people have a problem with organized crime. Why? It's just like the violence that's perpetuated by the state, or worse, is enabled or encouraged by the state, I think pales in comparison to anything that's any form of coercion by organized crime. I'm not saying
to ask this question, how many of you have been inconvenienced, harassed, extorted from by the state? And compare that to, or the other question, how many of you have had negative experiences with organized criminals? I've never had any of those. I've never come across organized criminals. Maybe I've been in the same bar as, some biker gang folks, but I've never been negatively influenced by organized crime, but you bet your ass I've been negatively influenced by the state. So yeah. So if we're going to do, I guess,
Lesser of two evils.
Yeah, lesser of two evils. Yeah,
maybe.
organized crime. Yeah, it's definitely more preferable because they tend to keep things internal, right? And they aren't forcing anybody to join. They aren't. I mean, there's definitely some differences between organized crime and the state.
And even when they are genuinely coercing people and all that, their activities tend to be limited to either people who are admittedly poorer, but like in really like deep inner city ghetto type situations, and or people who were greedy made deals with the organized criminal syndicate of whatever flavor and then kind of reneged, or there was some other problem, and now they want to just, and now the organized guys just basically want to break their freaking kneecaps because they basically reneged on a deal kind of thing. So it's like, okay, well, crapping on the folks who kind of are just kind of a victim of circumstance isn't exactly wonderful, but then why should I feel necessarily bad for people who were greedy and decided to cut some corners and make some deals that they had no intention of fulfilling? I mean, that's a breach of contract as far as I'm concerned. And so if that's indeed the case, why should I feel sad for the guy in the white collar who decided to make some deals with the local mafia don, for whatever reason didn't fulfill his side of the deal, whether due to his own fault or not, and now the enforcers are coming to break his freaking kneecaps with a baseball bat. And I'm supposed to feel sorry for him. Why?
Yeah, I thought personal responsibility was important here. Yeah, so bad decision. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like the libertarian credo is don't hurt anybody and honor your contracts. The second part being the one that's most relevant here: honor your contracts, or else the friggin' mafia will come and break your kneecaps. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, But a lot of people in the servile society think that it's a-okay to break their contracts and whatever else, and it's just, I don't know, it's kind of a problem. But yeah, it's interesting in this other paragraph here about how the triads are built in ethnicity and they share a cultural narrative. The ethnicity being Han Chinese, and then of course cultural narrative is resistance to the Manchu rule. So that's interesting. So the importance of culture comes to the forefront again, doesn't it?
Yeah, the alt-right is right about something, and it's that culture is important. Only unfortunately, the culture that the alt-right is proposing is definitely of the first realm. So we're talking second realm culture, being respect for private property, autonomy, freedom, those sorts of things, and whatever the cultural resistance for the triads, resistance to the Manchu rule. So they were anti-government, at least to a certain extent, and it looks like they basically exploited street criminals and focus on less public crime. So culture is gonna get brought up a lot throughout this series, and it kind of has been already.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's kind of like a rallying point for people. Also, something let me make a point about the first realm real quickly. Notice the importance of like mass media, and more importantly, like so-called entertainment, TV shows, movies, music, other forms of art. In a lot of ways, that's what even people who are strangers to each other in the first realm, when they meet each other, either in the context of a more work professional situation or more of like a social type situation of one kind or another, like, oh, my kid plays Little League, your kid plays Little League, and we both like House of Cards or something, right? Well, the House of Cards part is the first realm entertainment thing, right, as the example of that, right? And they're like, oh, now we have something in common, and then, I don't know, that can sometimes open doors, sometimes not.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that you can see in the first realm how shared cultural preferences, or preferences within that culture, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. Excuse me, folks, I'm a little bit tired tonight. Can basically serve as a common point, a rallying point in some sense that can then open doors to other things.
Right. So for second realm culture, those rallying cries, so to speak, would be oh, you're an anarchist, cool. Oh, you're into blockchain technology, cool. Oh, you CNC machine ARs in your basement, awesome. Yeah, let's talk. So yeah, for anarchists and for second realmers and for Vonuans and Agoras, yeah, definitely a lot more substantive than most of the conversation or relationship starters in the first realm. They're just boring, typically, just boring.
Oh, I've had my fill of them at work, but yeah, let's keep on rolling along here.
Yes, sir. All right, back to it. Quote, a similar pattern of social narrative, ethnic focus, and well-controlled intervention into the public realm shows itself with the Yakuza. They even put a strong focus on being recognizable by the public. Well, the previous three examples cover older organizations. Outlaw motorcycle gangs are a more recent phenomenon. They openly display their outlaw image as part of their culture. As part of their culture, create their own social norms and use their own form of justice. All the previous examples share some characteristics in operation and organization that can serve as hints to what successful parallel structures need. First, and end quote, this is kind of the most important part here, along with the next one. So pay attention if you aren't already. Quote, first, they're all based on their own independent culture and values. They are not chaotic and lawless, but have their own laws that are often stricter and more conservative than mainstream culture. For example, the Yakuza forbid their members to partake in theft, the Mafia punishes members for adultery, and all of them take oaths and vocal contracts very seriously, end quote. So let's talk about that. So the point here, what they're presenting is, so for the second realm, there are some things, again, that can be learned from organized criminal syndicates. So this first one, all based on their own independent culture and values. Well, that is definitely the second realm. The culture and the philosophy of the second realm is completely opposite of the first realm. Everything the first realm does is antithetical to, what we would do in second realms. So as far as, independent culture and values, oh yeah, without a doubt. And the first realm might accuse us second realmers as being lawless, that we're violating the laws. And well, actually, if you look at it, well, what does the state do on a daily basis? They steal, they murder, they extort, etc., etc., etc. The laws, so-called laws, which are basically just principles in the second realm, would be stricter to some degree, right? All initiatory force is immoral. Stealing is a violation of autonomy, and etc., etc., etc. So stricter in some ways, but obviously, when it comes to anything outside of the realm of initiatory force or violations of autonomy, that's all personal choice, anyways. So,
well, it's funny you should.
Go ahead.
It's funny you mention that, because consider too, like the so-called black ops type folks within the military-industrial complex. I mean, that's probably one of the shiniest examples of the state being hypocritical, is because they make laws that the rest of us are expected to obey. And, God forbid you step out of line even slightly and they come down you like a ton of bricks if they catch you. But one if their black operatives does something, oh, no, he was doing it state-sanctioned, terrorism or whatever.
Laws are for the peasants.
Laws are for the peasants, exactly, unless you have a special dispensation and you've been vetted 20 million times and the state trusts you to some extent, unless you pull an Edward Snowden on them and betray them as they would view it as a betrayal. Unless you pull an Edward Snowden on them, they'll pretty much keep you safe for the most part, unless, of course, you're convenient to toss by the wind, as what happened to Valerie Plume. Because people kind of forgot about her during the Bush years, because she was an undercover CIA agent that was outed by the Bush administration and other people and all that. So all of that training, all the investment, all that, she got completely blown out of the water. So she can't work undercover ever again, and hasn't for the longest time. So, it's kind of odd. It's kind of odd that you will have like your black ops guys of one kind or another, and they can basically go around and pretty much do just about whatever the hell they want. And then you have other people who are good, loyal servants of the state, but shall we say are politically convenient to basically use as sacrificial lambs, like Mrs. Plume. And and her husband had some things to say too about like all the nights I never had with my wife. She was dedicated to this job, and now that she, it's like we were both robbed or something. I mean, that's kind of a story for another time. But what happened to her was unconscionable. And usually I don't say that about government servants. Public servants. I usually don't say that. But with her, I do she's one of the very, very few I would make an exception about that, because she was good, in the sense of their values. She was good, she was loyal, she followed orders, she did everything right, and it still wasn't good enough. And that's kind of the other problem too, is even if you're a good old law-abiding citizen, and you pay your taxes, you obey the laws, and you jump through 20 million hoops, and you fill out your paperwork, and you work your crappy corporate job and everything else, or however your lifestyle is, it's still never good enough. They want more and more and more till they rule the entire planet. And you know what? I wouldn't even be surprised, even if the conspiracists are right about the hypothetical New World Order or whatever. Hell, why would you think that any sort of hypothetical secret society of power-mad, crazy elitists would stop there? Even if they did get their global government, why wouldn't they expand out to the moon?
The Galactic Order, or whatever it would be called. Yeah.
Did anybody watch Star Trek or Babylon 5? For all the sci-fi people. I mean, the whole point of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, that particular series, which I still think is the best one, the whole point of Deep Space Nine was basically a sci-fi explanation of U.S. Foreign policy. The whole thing was about war. And also seeing how people who were not warlike, how they maintained peace was through trade. And the hub of trading was through the Deep Space Nine, the actual space station. People kind of don't put this together in terms of like pop culture or whatever. And so when it comes to looking at the first realm and then looking at as well as the second realm we would like and we're trying to build, and first explain and then build, this is kind of the stuff that we're trying to avoid. We don't want to like penalize our own people who actually do everything correctly.
So the first realm culture is definitely degrading. Whereas the goal with the second realm is that you reward people for wasn't that something that Rayo mentioned, that reward people for their consistency or something like that?
Yeah, basically.
Don't punish people who are respecting privacy, respecting private property and autonomy, and that are providing valuable goods and services to you. Reward them. Don't punish them. That's stupid. That's so stupid, and that just is another element of the degrading first realm culture.
Right. And one final comment about this before we continue on with the rest of the episode. There is a reason why a lot of people in the first realm don't like that Netflix series House of Cards, because it's one of the very I think personally it's one of the very few times where you have art imitates life, life imitates art. It's one of those very few examples of pop culture fiction that is actually trying to tell you something real about the system itself, trying to show you how heartlessly Machiavellian it really is, what the Russians call realpolitik with a K. Okay, it's trying to show you how realpolitik actually works, yes, through hypothetical examples of the storyline of House of Cards with Frank Underwood basically being the male version of Hillary Clinton and so forth, but it's – no, that's really what it is. He's just the male version of Clinton. But it's trying to show you something larger. It's trying to also kind of offer trying to ask the question of, is there more to politics than pure spectacle? Which actually is the key question driving the whole thing. I think so anyway. And it depends how you answer that question, which is actually very telling. A topic for another time. The reason why it's relevant here is that when you have a system that runs on Machiavellian-esque realpolitik, that means there can't be any integrity with anything. In fact, the incentives are skewed towards people who are hypocrites. Frank Underwood even admitted in one of the episodes about, condemn me if you think I'm a hypocrite. Yes, I am. It's one of the few times I'll tell you the truth kind of thing. And it's just yeah. So when in real world, when you have somebody like Valerie Plume, who really did have integrity, as far as I can tell, who really did have integrity, served the system with everything she got, spent less time with her husband doing what married couples do and all that, it didn't matter, is what I'm trying to say. They'll screw you, and not in a good way, which is what happened with her and her family and so forth. So yeah, it's kind of like if you want to have integrity of any kind, and it's not that anybody necessarily has to like you. Don't get me wrong, folks. There's going to be portions of the second realm you probably won't like, but it doesn't matter because it's all based on voluntary association anyway. We're not like the first realm. Sorry. I
was going to say I have an example of being punished for doing good things, helping out where the government, the local government has failed, at least to some degree. I interviewed a guy here that lives here in Decatur last month, and he actually went to his house. His name was Chef Kemuel Sanders, and this was the hood, man. When I went to his house and interviewed him, this was the hood. He doesn't have a lot of money. He doesn't have much at all. But what he did do was every single morning he'd wake up at 4 a.m. with him and his sons, and or maybe one of his sons and a couple of his sons' friends, and they would cook a big warm breakfast for the homeless people in Decatur. And what did the state do? Well, they raided his house, SWAT teams, because he didn't have the proper food permits. and they took over $1,000 worth of cooking equipment, for which to him is probably that's a lot of money. Like he's probably not gonna be able to raise that anytime soon. Thankfully, got about $500 in this GoFundMe, which I was hoping it'd be more, but better than nothing. I did what I could.
Yeah.
But actually it was the local police department here, the local butchery department. He would go serve the food there at the police department, but the county came in and actually enforced this code violation. So he was helping out the community, filling a desperate need that the local government wasn't doing, and they still fucked him. They really did. So,
right, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's an individual doing kind of an agorist type thing like that, or it's the organized crime kind of stepping in to try to fill the gaps where the state is and all that. It doesn't matter. Again, it's kind of like that old thing, that old placard that Ron Paul kept on his desk: "Don't steal. The government hates competition." Right, and to also pull a quote from somebody else, as Friedrich Nietzsche would put it, the state is the coldest of all cold monsters. And so, yeah, when they would go after somebody who, through his own, let's call it private charity. Yes, private charity.
Yep.
He was basically feeding the homeless, and it's like, damn it, you're not good enough. You didn't go us and ask us for permission. You didn't fill out the paperwork because you're not abiding by our cultural norms. How dare you disobey us? And it's like, dude, do you imagine yourselves to be my ruler? Yes, we do, because we're bureaucrats.
Yeah, and the worst part of it was that they sent freaking SWAT teams to his house.
He must be dangerous.
He almost I think he was holding back, crying whenever I was interviewing him. He's like, they treated me like I was a criminal and I was feeding the homeless. Like this is ridiculous. Like this is awful. But yeah, I guess to get back to this, I want to speak to one other thing in this paragraph. But the Yakuza forbid their members to partake in theft. Wow. So at least in this regard, the Yakuza is preferable to the state. I don't know what else they did. Sure, there was some bad stuff there, but they didn't allow their members to steal. That's pretty incredible, right?
Oh, it's definitely an improvement. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, man. The more I've looked at organized crime, it's definitely lesser. People talk about lesser of two evils during an election. That's a false dichotomy. I think a better dichotomy is: do you want government or do you want organized crime? If you had a real choice to make, just between the two, not a third option
right.
or anything else.
Isn't that the argument against anarcho-capitalism? Is that you just have these these organized criminal corporations, so to speak? Which one would I? We've seen the clear-cut results of the state over the since the beginning of human beings. Let's try something different, even though it may not be the most preferable thing.
But the people who are also saying that are kind of also making an assumption that the organized criminal syndicates aren't alive and operating today, even with the state around. And it's like, are you people mental? I'm sorry, have you not heard of the Camorra, the Yakuza, the Triads, MS-13? Oh, I almost forgot about them. Never mind. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Maybe I'll pull it up in a minute. But yeah, there's like a whole long list of other criminal syndicates. Like, this isn't even funny, and they're acting like the criminal syndicates aren't around.
Yeah, their organizations are existing, and they have been. So yes, it would be wise for second realmers to examine the strategies that they use. So let's go ahead and get back to that. Quote, another common characteristic is that these groups usually try to limit violence to their own community instead of spreading chaos. This has two reasons. Obviously, this limits the attention of law enforcement and public opinion that could make their business harder, but these people also understand themselves as being a part of their local community, which they often take effort to protect and help. This has the positive side effect of gaining public support within their territorial presence. End quote. So I guess we can just talk about that for a moment. That's interesting. I don't know. Like, again, I haven't looked into organized crime, so I don't know of any examples. Will they? They helped out their community. There was someone in need, and they, offered them $50,000. They gave them $50,000, as a charitable donation. But obviously, I think there's some negative things too, some violations of autonomy and property and such. But I guess there's an effort by some of these organizations to help out their community, just as Chef Camille Sanders did here in Decatur, and he's still trying to do. Obviously, not comparing him to an organized criminal syndicate, but just as an example here.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it would also be fair to say that perhaps in some circumstances, for whatever particular organized criminal syndicate we're talking about would probably do so with some strings attached. To be fair, But yeah, I don't know, man. It's just, do you want to get food stamps from the government, or do you want to get like a loan from, I don't know, the okay, maybe not the Gulf Cartel, but and maybe not MS-13, but I don't know, maybe the Yakuza might be the most reasonable of the bunch, provided you pay back on time with interest. Just saying.
Yeah, right. So next, let's continue forward here. Quote, contrary to popular opinion, these groups are not hierarchical command and control structures. Subgroups are often autonomous and do not follow top-down planning. Instead, they share part of their profit with the upper hierarchy in return for specialized services, investment, and justice provision. Often these groups have to answer to their leaders primarily for causing too much trouble, being too violent, or interfering with other subgroups' business. Apart from that, they are highly independent. End quote. So, yeah, that's something I really didn't know. I wasn't aware that these were kind of decentralized sort of organizations, at least to a certain extent. So, interesting, I guess, little fact there.
Well, I love the part where they mention about being too violent. Like, okay, wait, so there's actually a limit? There's a limit to the violence? Because I never hear that from the state at all. It's just like, yeah, whatever you can pretty much get away with.
Never enough.
Yeah. It's not torture. It's enhanced interrogation with our war on terrorism, right? That's happened during the Bush years and since then, right? So yeah, I know if they're torturing, if if a mobster is torturing somebody, they're torturing somebody when they pull their fingernails out with a pair of pliers or whatever, right? It's torture. It is what it is. Just be honest about it, won't you? Be honest about it. To go off that stereotype, right? It's just like. God, and it's interesting, the decentralized part of it. See, this is why I like talking about the Camorra. I know everybody likes to talk about the Mafia a lot. Mafia is not so interesting. It's actually the Camorra, which are way more interesting because they arose in the region of, Campania and of course, its capital of Naples. If I remember correctly, I believe they date back to about the 18th, 17th century or so. They've been around for a very long time. And oh, by the way, the mafia is actually the Sicilian mafia. And anybody who understands the history of Italy in any context knows that Italy is really more a conglomeration of like different kinds of peoples. And so the Sicilians are not the same as the Campanians. So the mafia does not get along with the Camorra is what I'm trying to say. They are very, very different. And the Sicilian mafia has a more stereotypical, hierarchical, I guess you could say pyramid type structure. The Camorra is not that. The Camorra is horizontal, not vertical. The Camorra clans are pretty independent of each other, much like what's kind of implied here in the Second Realm book to some extent. So yeah, that's kind of that. Now it's interesting. As a side note, the Camorra would kind of get themselves involved in like waste management because the government wouldn't do it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, but you don't understand. Whenever they needed to make sure somebody disappeared, well, since they already controlled the waste management companies,
easy disposal.
And nobody would raise an eyebrow. Now, unlike, like, for example, when the mafia would be operating domestically here, they would have to pay somebody off because, of course, the government controlled the fucking waste management. Okay? So the Camorra kind of did it the right way the first time. It's like, we're not going to work with the government. We'll just own the freaking company, do it ourselves, and try to not have anybody see us dump bodies in the middle of the night kind of thing, right? So the Camorra were more slick about it, at least as far as I understand their history.
Interesting. Yeah. Comical too. Comical. I like it. Well, not the murder part, but the entertainment aspect of it.
Actually, hold on. There is this one quote from. Hold on. Let me pull up the source citation on this real quick. This was actually it was quoted by somebody. I think it was in the New York Times, July 13th, 1911. Holy crap, this was old. Okay, so basically the context of this was that at the first mass trial against the Camorra in 1911, Captain Carlo Fabroni of the Carabinieri, basically, I think it's military police, if I remember my Italian history right.
And are these people still around?
I think he's dead.
No, I mean the Camorra.
Oh, gee. They're so active, it's funny.
Cool. All right. I was just curious. So yeah, 19. So these people have been around for 100 years. This group has been. So that's
18th, 17th century. Hundreds of years.
Yeah. So yeah.
Hundreds of years. Okay. So basically, the context of this quote is that the Italian government can't really ever prosecute these people. And at the first mass trial against the Camorra in about 1911 and 12, Captain Carlo Fabroni of the Carabinieri basically was trying to he gave testimony about how hard it was to prosecute them. And this is the captain's quote during the trial. Quote, "The Camorristi have no political ideals. They exploit elections and the elected for gain. The leaders distribute bans throughout the town, and they have recourse to violence to obtain the vote of the electors for the candidates whom they have determined to support. Those who refuse to vote as instructed are beaten, slashed with knives, or kidnapped. All this is done with assurance of impunity, as the Camorristes have the protection of successful politicians who realize they cannot be chosen to office without paying toll to the Camorra." End quote.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, the Camorra were not completely stupid. They basically kind of made sure the state was subservient to them, and then they were able to use coercion and so forth and get away with whatever the hell. So they basically,
oh, no.
so
Whoops.
well, it wasn't even so much they bought off the government; they just controlled the government.
That's one way to do it, right?
Think about it. Who's gonna keep the blackmail files on the politicians that keep them in line, right?
Yeah. So I think the point with the Camorra is that, as again, like this, the reason we're talking about organized crime is that individuals trying to build second realms can learn a lot. If these people have been around for 300-400 years, they've existed, within the same territories as nation states, and they've been successful, at least in relative terms. There's definitely a lot that can be learned from the Camorra. So maybe I don't know if. Maybe at some point, maybe just a normal LUA episode, we should, examine a couple of these organized criminal syndicates, more in depth after I've done my research.
Well, yeah, but again, this is kind of more of a broader introductory look at it. But yeah, it's but what's mentioned in the Second Realm book is quite fascinating because they're trying to encapsulate a lot of very complicated information very simply, and I think they did a bang up job because like contrary to popular opinion, these groups are not hierarchical command and control structures. That is the Camorra specifically, not even counting anybody else. So
and if they were centralized, they probably wouldn't be as effective. So
well, of course not. Because let's say hypothetically, if the state was able to SWAT team and basically dismantle an entire Camorra clan, well, what about all the other ones? Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, diminishing returns at some point, right?
Yeah.
Anyways,
economics.
Yep, exactly. Quote, "The last commonality to point out is that these groups control locations like clubhouses, offices, restaurants, or similar places where they can meet and conduct their business outside of public view, which they protect against surprise raids or infiltration by round-the-clock staffing, alarms, posts, guards, and security technology." End quote. You know what this reminds me of, Kyle? We're going to talk about this, I think, in the second last episode of the series, but it reminds me in #Agora when they went to that private nightclub and did drugs and banged prostitutes and such, and I don't think they banged them, but they had hired women. But that's kind of what reminds me of their temporary autonomous zones, or at least probably more permanent, at least to some extent for some of these places. But think of it more like a network that they just kind of move around in. But yeah. Yeah, exactly. So something that could be learned from organized criminal syndicates, yes, that's very much a part of the Second Realm. You've written stuff like that, I think, in the Agorist Anecdote and some other I guess fictional examples, and this shows up in a lot of the Agorist literature. So I mean, yeah, this is a proven strategy. It's temporary autonomous zones, which we've already discussed. If the coercers can't find you, they can't coerce you. And by rotating between, you never know where specific individuals are going to be. The state's going to have a little trouble, pinning that down. So definitely wise in private security. That's great. There was, and we'll talk about this in the Blessings of Technology episode in this series, but protecting against raids. Yeah, there's going to be some really interesting technological, I guess, ideas brought up as we move through the series. So what do you have there?
Just more of an anecdote about the Yakuza real quickly. Because again, since we're talking about like the organized crime being, preferable to the state, here's actually a fascinating real world example. So there was the Kobe earthquake, also known as the Great Hanshan earthquake, back in 1995. Ooh, that was really back in the day, wasn't it? It measured 6.9 on the magnitude scale and so forth. And the whole thing lasted for about 20 seconds. It really kind of demolished a good chunk of Kobe, which is southwest of Tokyo, pretty much. Yeah, so the Japanese government had a really slow disaster relief service, which was really slow. So 5 guesses who stepped in.
Oh yeah, even if that's just a PR stunt, I mean that's still benefits people.
Specifically, it was the Yamaguchi-gumi, which is the 6th largest Yakuza organization. See, there's not like one Yakuza. There's like, ooh, this sounds like the Kimura, right? In some sense, there's actually multiple different Yakuzas. And specifically, the Yamaguchi-gumi was the one that stepped in to actually provide very quick disaster relief services, beating the Japanese government. And they even used a helicopter. And then later in the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, the Yamaguchi-gumi opened their offices to refugees and sent trucks out with supplies to affected areas.
You know that sounds like a I guess a style in like the Kama Sutra or something. The name of their organization.
Yamaguchi-gumi, yeah, unless I'm mispronouncing it or something. But and fascinatingly enough, you know, I was mentioned in the book just a little bit ago about about preventing limiting violence and not getting involved with other groups' activities or whatever. Yeah, the Yamaguchi-gumi apparently forbid their members from engaging in drug trafficking, even though other
what do they do then?
They do other things apparently.
Huh.
But yeah, but to be fair, so the other Yakuzas, like the Dojin Kai, do drug trafficking, but the Yamaguchi-gumi are like, no drug trafficking for you. So there's interesting, because remember, the Yakuza in general have a very strict code of conduct, and they are internationally recognized for having very strict codes of conduct. Again, kind of in the book here where it was mentioned about organized crime in general tends to have cultural norms that they have, social norms that they have.
More conservative than even the mainstream, yeah.
Well, the Yakuzas are even more so than even more of their other organized criminal syndicate contemporaries, because they're internationally famous for that. And the Yamaguchi-gumi apparently are noted drug trafficking, even though the what was their name again? Dojin Kai do it. So it's interesting. So even different portions of the Yakuza do some types of things, but not others.
It's like a freedom cell where it's completely up to the organization itself.
Yes,
the individual members. Yeah, and again, not to compare freedom cells to organized crime, but organized criminal syndicates. But there are a lot of overlaps and parallels of how to spontaneously structure these decentralized, I guess, freedom associations of one sort or another.
Right, and one last thing I'll say about the Yakuza, because you'll get a kick out of this, and excuse me if my Japanese is not as good as it used to be. They engage in a certain form of extortion called sokaiya. Basically, think of it as a version on the theme of a protection racket. So instead of like the typical stereotype of like the mafia harassing small businessmen, what the Yakuza instead do is that they harass the stockholders' meeting of large corporations. So in other words, they scare the living shit out of stockholders with the presence of Yakuza operatives. And those Yakuza operatives are allowed to attend the stockholders meeting because they've made enough stock purchases to legitimately be there.
Jesus Christ.
You see how cool that is? I mean, this is I mean cool in the sense of like a demonic genius type thing. So the Yakuza operatives are legitimately stockholders themselves, but because they're there and the other people know about the Yakuza, like, oh my God, so and so is the Yakuza. Oh my God, we better like do what they want or whatever, right? So by their sheer, it's almost like Batman.
But they're not harassing, individuals though. So I guess the stockholders are individuals, but they aren't just harassing some guy on the street. Which I don't know if that's really preferable, but it's just a notable difference.
I think it's friggin' hilarious because in some ways it's like a version on theme of kind of what like Bat in fiction when like Batman does. Like he scares criminals, he scares living bejesus out of them just by his sheer presence. At least that's the ideal, right? Because of the cape and cowl and all that kind of stuff. But the Yakuza scare the living shit out of these corporate stockholders just by their sheer presence as Yakuza.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and start reading. Quote, surely these groups conduct business that is highly unethical and employ methods that conflict with the rules of engagement we are limited to. Nevertheless, they also provide some hints for long-term stability of outlaw organizations. These are, number one, they define and nurture their own parallel culture and society. end quote. So I think we should just stop, just real briefly, stop and just make a couple notes on each one of these. So with the second realm, obviously it's defined. The foundations of the second realm are peace and autonomy. So obviously the foundations for the second realm are laid, and that's nurtured into a parallel culture and society.
Yeah. And yeah, there are certain parallels, obviously, but obviously, we've got to obey the non-aggression principle. That kind of goes without saying. That being said, I think and I said this earlier this episode, I want to say it one more time. For anybody who understands the agorist theory of the 5 markets, I think one of the more challenging, not impossible, but challenging challenges. Is challenging challenges okay? Oh, what the hell? What's wrong with that? One of the most challenging challenges, at the risk of redundancy, that's going to be kind of upcoming in the next, years and decades and such, is not just the issue of economic literacy, which I still think is one of the great evils of our time, but also related to that, really kind of making it crystal clear to people that there is a difference, a very high level of difference between red market activity and black market activity, because too many people in the servile side like to call anything that they don't like and or illegal and or real crimes, the red market stuff, as black market. And that conflagration,
it's led us to a time where the asshole in chief wants to murder heroin dealers. So yeah,
pretty much. And for some reason that's acceptable because he was the heir apparent, and now he imagines himself to be basically the Machiavellian prince. And so the prince has spoken, and we are supposed to either support the prince or at least maybe not necessarily agree with the prince but obey him anyway, or at bare minimum not speak out against the prince as far as like baseline of behavior goes, because that would be unpatriotic, of course. But of course, if people were really patriotic, they would obey speed limits because we're all supposed to obey the law, right? Like I said that other episode.
That was private conversation, actually, I think.
Oh, whoops.
Hey, yeah. I do think at some point you should flesh it out. Maybe at the conclusion of this, your idea that you came up with, that was really interesting. I tried to put it into a fascist book status, but I was going to bastardize it, so I didn't do that. But
your bastardization would still be pretty good. But yeah, fair enough. Oh God, that was private conversation. My bad. Damn. No. Bad security culture. Bad security culture. Oh, yeah, hopefully nobody gets killed over that, right? But yeah, in any case, seriously though, I think a lot of people are just really kind of confusing different types of human action in different ways. I mean, perfectly fair, red market activity is still a form of human action. It's just illegal and immoral. And anything the state does is done by humans, and I guess it would count as human action. Purposeful behavior, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it, yeah. If you want to repress people and do it while getting away with it clean, yeah, you should become a bureaucrat or a politician. Yeah, sure. I mean, that kind of falls under that too. Right? I mean, Ludwig von Mises was a utilitarian. He's just simply trying to explain phenomenon in the world.
Right. And that's the difference between an economist and a philosopher. Is the economist just looks at, doesn't judge the human action itself. It's just, doesn't judge it just judges the efficaciousness of the ends, not, the various elements thereof. If I remember human action correctly.
Right.
It's been a couple years.
That's accurate. That's accurate. And so, yeah, if you're trying to basically gauge if you want to be the nastiest, biggest criminal around, and you basically want to essentially start trade wars, and you want to essentially abuse your office and a couple other things of the current prince, and not only that, but also other people who are kind of surrounding him and all that, because it's never actually the real – as a side note for people who don't understand mainstream American politics, it's not just the current prince, the so-called president. It's not the prince that's actually the important thing. It's the people behind him. It's the people supporting him. It's his chief of staff. It's all the bureaucrats who actually are the really important people, at least to some degree or another. And so, yeah, if you want to basically be the nastiest, biggest bully on the block, or at least try to be, or at least compete with them, then yes, of course you're going to run to the state and get yourself elected, or at least try. So when you have and that's why I don't like democratic elections, whether or not it is under the purview of a constitutional republic, is that basically the slate of candidates for any political office, whether high visibility or not. I don't care if it's a stupid local congressional.
Between a fascist and a communist, always, with plenty of overlap.
Yes, there's that. But in an even more basic sense than just that superficial difference, which is important to understand for other reasons, on a more basic level, all you really have are basically a slate of individuals who are trying to compete to be the local bully, basically. Now, they can say, oh, I'm a senator. Oh, I'm your congressional representative who represents you in the whatever. It doesn't matter. They're just bullies. That's all it is. That's all it ever was.
Government itself is organized crime. It's legal.
Yeah, it's the legal. You see, that's the funny thing, too, is that the organized crime is actually illegal, as opposed to the legal organized crime, which, of course, is all the pink market activity and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, when you look at different forms of human action, that assuming it is purposeful behavior, as Mises defined human action, that it is purposeful behavior, then yes, if you want to be the biggest bully on the block and you want to rob everybody and murder as many people as you can and steal from them and maybe engage in a little bit of slavery here and there in one sense or another, or at least have people under the thumb, which is like, I guess there's maybe different versions of slavery perhaps, topic for another time, then yeah, you would join the state because the state attracts criminals to it like moths to a flame. And if you can't hack it in government, well, I guess the next best thing might be organized crime, maybe. But even then, in organized crime, you're going to have to perform. You're going to have to satisfy your customers. There actually is some degree of accountability. Like, if you wanted to go into government, couldn't, and then you went to organized crime, sorry, kid, you're going to have a real sharp learning curve. And even then, you might just get, bumped off. I'm just saying. You don't honor your contracts once. If you get your kneecaps broken, consider yourself lucky because it could have been a lot worse, concrete shoes and all that. Just saying.
Yeah, exactly. So that number one, again, we learned a little digression, which is fun, valuable stuff. But number one, they define and nurture their own parallel culture in society. That is definitely what the second realm does. Number two, they follow a least intervention policy concerning outsiders, especially in the realms of violence. This one is big. Now, I think we talked about this in previous episodes, but and this is why assassination politics might not actually be a second realm activity, is because the two realms, the first and the second realm, there's a fine distinguishing line, and the two realms don't interact. They're two completely separate realms. Now, with organized crime, yeah, it seems like from the examples they provided, everything's kind of done internally, and at least a lot of it's done internally. There's still the organized criminal syndicate stuff that you would see, stealing and kind of the unethical behavior. But it seems like the trend is, trying to limit conflict with outsiders and keeping most of it internal. So that's definitely, an aspect of the second realm, minus the unethical activity.
Yeah, that kind of does seem to be the case. Let me offer something I probably should have said earlier. Consider also, too, there are some individuals in organized crime who will snitch, who will, what's the term the government likes to use? Cooperate. We want your cooperation. But if you don't cooperate us, we'll send you to up the river for 40 years or whatever, right? That's their idea of cooperation, by the way. Do what we want or we'll hurt you. Obey or be punished. But that's cooperation, of course. Kind of like voluntary compliance with the income tax laws, but that's a topic for another time itself. Yeah, the snitching. There's a reason why with organized crime, and even not unorganized criminals too, both of them, why there is pretty much a universal disdain for snitching. And that was something I always worried about because me personally, I don't like snitching for other reasons because it gets innocent people in trouble with the government. But even actual real criminal types don't like snitching either because it basically hampers their criminal activities. So sure. Meeting of the minds, maybe in a little sense, it's like, loose lips sink ships, I think was the old World War II slogan and all that. So if the state was promoting something like that so you don't sink the ships, because of Nazis or whatever, then maybe you shouldn't get yourself or other people in trouble because of the war on drugs or whatever, depending on who may or may not have some pot around. Or even DMT. Or DMT or, pick a substance that the state doesn't like, unless they directly tax and regulate it like they do with alcohol. And actually now as time goes on, even some areas with cannabis even then too. So, that's progress. We went from complete ban to tax and regulate. Topic for another time too, but it's just like, God, you look at all these historical parallels and it's just sad. Now cannabis is going the way of alcohol. Oh yeah, that's progress, says the left.
Going the way of alcohol, and then big agricultural companies like Monsanto or Monsanto and some other ones are going to get into that game and lobby their way into some sort of a monopoly, which is certainly unfortunate. So there will definitely always be at least a gray market in marijuana. And as I found out from Jason Paradise when we did our black market botany episode, when he was talking about some of his previous activities, that even in Colorado there's still that kind of black and gray market in marijuana because the barriers to entry and all of the fines and regulations that are put in place. You can still get it cheaper, and you can actually get it cheaper in the black market. In some
surprise!
Yeah.
Well,
I actually saw there was one marijuana dispensary receipt that I saw on Fascist Book, and the tax rate was like over 100%. So,
jeez. And see, I thought, according to the Servile Society, the mainstream media and all that stuff, I thought they said that black market goods are bad because they're so expensive, right? The black market always jacks up prices because they're price gouging. Oh, wait, that's right. Mainstream media is composed of a bunch of leftists who are economically illiterate. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, because it's so much cheaper when you tax and regulate something, right? It's cheap. It's cheaper to have things be taxed and regulated, right, Shane, by the state? Because that's what truly brings prices down, not market competition, not
and that boosts the economy.
Wow. That's a good point. So actually, it is cheaper to actually do the black market cannabis stuff still in Colorado because the red tape and all that. Really? Wow.
That's what I've heard, and I'm not surprised with some of the stuff I've seen.
Well, if there is any reason for a least intervention policy by organized crime, wow, that kind of started to make a lot more sense.
Yeah, exactly. So number 3, local autonomy for subgroups protects them against decapitation and maximizes their flexibility. Yeah, exactly. If you look at second realms as kind of I guess in the same vein as freedom cells, the freedom cells are autonomous themselves, and therefore if one freedom cell is taken out, then there are still the 15, 20, 100,000 that are out there. So definitely protects against decapitation and definitely maximizes flexibility. So for second realms, yeah, there's not going to be one second realm. In regards to van nomadism, their mobile intentional communities, those are all second realms, and they're in various locations with various people at various times and in various places. So the flexibility and the kind of local autonomy is definitely huge in that same kind of decentralized open source sort of way that seems like things are going in that direction, which is really great. So I think it's only a matter of time with the way things are progressing. Not saying it's going to be large scale, but I'm saying within the way technology is developing, I do think that it's kind of inevitable that there will be second realms. I just want to get them going faster.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, me too. I mean, we need to have other options. And quite frankly, anybody who's still interested in political crusading really doesn't understand just the reality of the situation as it is,
Yep, Mr. Gokesh. Oh, wow.
Yeah, really.
That was, yeah.
Yeah, really.
Whoops. All right, number 4, they create a positive image in their local community through acts of aid and relief. Now, I want to make this clear with this one in regards to the second realm. Second realms wouldn't go out and do public charity in the first realm to make themselves look benevolent. They wouldn't do that. What they're saying is that in the second realm, there would be a positive image because there would be mutual aid and such. Because as per security culture, it wouldn't be wise for a second realm to advertise openly and publicly in the first realm, considering the first realm is dangerous, and many folks in the state of servile society would love to see these second realmers in prison. Some of them would even like to see them dead. So I want to make that very clear.
Well, yeah. So maybe that would be one of the major differences between organized crime and the second realm is being so. I'm trying to think. What was the term used to describe the C4CF guys back who did the bird sitting or who did the squatting in a bird cage? Public or civil defiance, I think it was. I think that was the term. Yeah, civil defiance is. I mean, sure, if you have a death wish and you want to make a suicide pact of sorts,
definitely not a positive public image either.
And there's a reason why the only real, depictions of civil defiance in a lot of ways were really just fictional, kind of like in that novel Net Assets. There was a couple different, at least, 2 or 3 different scenes where there was civil defiance going on. There was like, oh, we have a big standoff, but then the government backed down. I'm like, yeah, okay, now I know I'm reading fiction, because I'm trying to honestly think of any time the government didn't back down, where it didn't escalate to violence. Because the state always has an incentive, like up the ante, up and up and up and up, and then like, okay, fine, we're just murdering all of you, and then wow, there's a shock.
Yeah.
So, as much as I like the novel Net Assets, the depiction of, okay, we're going to do the civil defiance thing, we're now doing it, and the special ops military guys that just hopped off their helicopter totally run away with their tails between their legs, and they didn't even fire, and nobody on either side fired a shot. I mean, it's like, come on.
Yeah, a little anticlimactic. But yeah, I actually forgot about that book. Yeah, that was a really good book too.
It was
not necessarily in the realm, not necessarily second realm material, but as far as kind of a libertarian space exploration sort of venture. Yeah, really, really good book. Really good book.
Well, without spoiling the plot too much, I particularly enjoyed the kinetic bombardment on the White House, which I think is a little bit more realistic than, the special ops military guys just back down whenever the brave entrepreneurs and the 3%ers and everyone else waving the Gadsden flags, like, stare them down. It's like, okay, this is the Bundy thing all over again, except... Actually, no, this is pretty much the Bundy thing, right? Because, okay, maybe, to be fair, maybe that was the one time civil defiance actually worked, was the whole, Bundy standoff thing. Maybe. But then remember, for anybody who understands that, and a lot of our coverage of kind of some stuff that took place afterwards that the mainstream media didn't really follow up on, or kind of did, but then they kind of downplayed it, was the vengeance that the BLM had against the Bundy family and other people, and like, how many felony convictions were there? And come on,
most of those people got off scot-free though, even the Bundys. So
yeah, well, I haven't kept up with a lot of that.
I haven't really either. I see anarchists post about it, which is good, I guess. But yeah, I mean, so I guess there's definitely some vengeance, and you've got to imagine that the state suffered some losses, and they're not going to take that lightly, and they can't let this image that a bunch of people with guns can make the feds back down, and then the feds can't even get a conviction in their own courtrooms. They're not going to let that image fly too long. So
no.
Yeah, this is things might be getting even more interesting. Actually, no, because never mind, because they've oh, God damn it. Oh man, seems like a conspiracy, but they've already handled that with Mr. Trump. Now the Patriots aren't worried about civil defiance. They're political crusading again. So problem solved. Jesus Christ.
I smell a little bit of dialectic at play. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the other problem too, is that it's just kind of like, even if the Bundys and company got off scot-free, does it really matter because of the political crusading thing that was actually a parallel development? Both things were happening at the same time. And now, we're in early what's the year, 2018? We're in early 2018, and it's just like, shit. This is kind of where things have ended up.
Yeah, and it's kind of backsliding into political crusading and just going backwards in general.
Yeah, and so before we get on with the rest of it, let me just say this: perhaps as an episode, maybe we should consider like doing follow up on the C4, the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom, the C4CF.
I have the results on my desktop. Yeah, we need to do that at some point.
But yeah, maybe we'll do that because we covered so much of it back in the day because we're old guys.
I'm still sick of it. Yeah, I'm still sick of it. I spent so many hours doing that shit that
me too.
I'm still burnt out, and it's been a year and a half.
But to be fair, if there has been some significant developments which actually would suggest a different lesson to be learned, then we have to do our due diligence. And we're not going to run. We have other stuff we're doing too, so we'll get to it. But because it's more of a historical, maybe a little bit of historical revisionism too, to be perfectly frank, which I'm pretty partial to. But I think it's important to at least get some facts out because mainstream media kind of fell off the wagon on that one, and so we kind of need to pick up the ball and actually try to figure out what the hell happened, because there were some other issues too. I mean, how many committees of safety are there? Oh wait, there's still that issue. You see,
half a committee of safety.
Yeah, exactly, because that whole thing really got sidetracked. Yeah, that thing really got sidetracked in like 20 million different directions. And there's also a lot of underreporting. So even if there are some good things happening, nobody's really talking about it because everybody wants to talk about the prince, because the prince apparently rules the damn world, apparently. Oh, there's your global government. Trump is in charge of it all. Oh, please. At this point, please, can just North Korea just freaking nuke all of us so we can all be dead at this point? I mean, it's that bad. I mean, hey, do you think there's a reason what's his face is like now getting into talks with South Korea? Do you think that's by accident?
United against a common enemy.
Mm-hmm. The enemy of my enemy may not necessarily be my friend, but can definitely help prevent nuclear war. Yep. So, maybe commies are starting to get, a little wised up. I mean, the Chinese commies definitely did, and they became fascists. and now the North Korean commies are maybe not necessarily fascism, but they've kind of realized that their whole thing doesn't work, and their people are fed is because of black markets in food. So maybe they'll have to rethink some things. I mean, who knows? That's kind of its own topic for another time. The relevancy here to the organized crime thing is that the organized criminals are doing a positive image in their local community through acts of aid and relief. Well, like I said earlier with the Yamaguchi Gucci, cool, I guess, but for second realmers, the security culture is more important. So not so much on that one.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. So number 5, temporary autonomous locations provide them with protected space to conduct their business. These locations often exist long enough to justify them as semi-permanent. Obviously, this one's huge. We did it was actually a two-parter on temporary autonomous zones and permanent autonomous zones. And again, if the coercers can't find you, they can't coerce you. TAZs are probably the most important part of the second realm. Seriously, because nothing else can really happen without them. So as far as organized crime, talked about their clubhouses, their restaurants, et cetera, semi-permanent, sure, but it's worked for them for a long time, and it's proven to work. So for second realmers, it's almost guaranteed that temporary autonomous zones will work, very efficaciously, considering the semi-permanent ones by the organized criminal syndicates, who are much more above ground. It's very plausible. TAZs are.
Well, yeah. So if it works well for them, it should work for other people who are even
especially if we take it further than they do.
Yeah, especially with the remote controlled defense perimeter systems or whatever, which I think is pretty much the direction it's kind of going in. And remember, there was that scene in the novella #Agora that kind of was showing that too, especially with using smartphones to like unlock locks, digital locks or whatever. So, or digitally protected locks. Sorry. And so forth. So, I think that's kind of where it needs to go, is to have at least some degree of automation so that you have fewer humans having to actually make everything work. That way there's a greater amount of individual autonomy through a development of digital technology. So, and of course, the next step after that would be the remotely controlled weaponry, actually, as a defense perimeter type thing.
Sure. Yeah, so number 6, using specialization and division of labor, they create an internal market for the provision of common services required throughout their subgroups. Now, this one is big. Rayo talked about this, the author of Vonu, The Search for Personal Freedom. He talked about, his aspirations for a Vonu association so that an alternative economy could exist. Unfortunately, I guess the deep web markets have solved this to a certain extent, but it's very limited. That organized criminal syndicates have been able to create a sort of internal alternative economy, and that should be the major goal for Second Realms. I don't think it really needs to be a focus, because as these develop, it will be inevitable. But yes, this one is definitely huge.
Well, yeah. Again, you can't do everything on your own completely 100%. And, any understanding of economics basically says that there has to be that division and specialization of labor. So that kind of, because there's only so many hours in a day, there's only so many, so much stuff you can do. And even if there was a limitless amount of time, which kind of doesn't make sense because that would negate the very concept of time itself. Even if time was limitless in some sense, there's also issues of competency and interest, right? Does everyone really want to learn how to churn their own butter? Or do they want to
Right.
hire other people to churn butter, whereas then they can take that same amount of time and do something that they find more, beneficial for themselves, kind of thing.
And to tie this into last week's episode, does everyone really want to specialize in import-export, or are more people going to hire proxy merchants instead?
Yeah, the proxy merchant thing is going to be more of a specialization, and they're going to really specialize in import-export and kind of make things a lot smoother for other people who may have at least some baseline skill in import-export, but they're not going to be really, really specialized in it, and their focus is going to be more on something else, more internally within the second realm, doing
Right.
one thing or another. Yeah.
Right, and if you want, some very specific examples and applications of this, go read Paul Rosenberg's *The Lodging of Wayfaring Men*. Everything we talk about in the Second Realm series, he puts it in a fictional format there, and it's super realistic and just a really terrific read. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So next one, 7, they all have a high focus on operating their own independent internal justice systems and legal code. This one is important too because, as I said before, the first and the second realms are completely distinguished from each other. There's no overlap. The second realm isn't going to try to change the politics of the first realm. They aren't going to assassinate their rulers through assassination markets. And they sure as hell, if there's a conflict, aren't going to go to the government arbitration systems. Not going to happen. And therefore, independent internal justice systems are absolutely crucial. It's a necessity. So thankfully, Second Realmers have a lot of history, a lot of case studies to look through with organized crime about just how kind of these things can come together. Although I think the ANCAPs have the theory down, quite well over the past however many years.
Yeah, I mean, yes, this is a recurring feature of different organized criminal syndicates, because think about it, the activities they're engaging in more or less tend to be illegal, at least to one extent or another, whether it's because of black market activity or red market activity. Either way, it's illegal according to the state. Therefore, if there is a breach of contract issue or there's an actual real, somebody murdered by girlfriend, stripper, wife type thing, you can't exactly go to the state, right? Because you're Don Corleone or whatever. Or even one of the underbosses. So now what do you do? Oh wait, that's right. You have to handle it yourself, or you have to handle it in-house in some manner. Hence the independent internal justice systems and legal code.
Right. Yes, exactly. So number 8, the last one. Because of their outlaw nature, they have to maintain their own security and defense operations against other outlaw organizations that intrude on their turf or prove hostile. This one's important because just as Second Realmers wouldn't go to a government arbitration system, they aren't going to call the goddamn bludgies either. So you have to provide that security and defense, and as we'll see in a couple episodes from now, maybe the next one, I don't remember off the top of my head. Technology will do a lot of that because it can be done mobily and remotely. And that is huge in making individuals more invulnerable to coercion, and technology has offered that. So private security and defense in Second Realms, oh yeah, it's going to be there. It's inevitable.
Well, you look at the different, the so-called Mexican drug cartels. So let's go through a brief list here. Whether we're talking about the Gulf cartel, like Los Zetas, the La Familia Michoacana, Los Caballeros Temporales, the Guadalajara cartel. Sorry, it's been a while since I spoke Spanish. The Sinaloa cartel, Medellin cartel, the Tijuana cartel, the Juarez cartel, even Los. Oh well, okay. Well, yeah. Oh, I did not know. Well, Los Tejas is disbanded. When did that happen? Well, see, I need to catch up on some of my organized crime news, apparently. But definitely. The La Linea is interesting. They're actually the Juarez cartel's enforcer squad. And there's also different street gangs that actually work for some of the larger cartels. So, for example, the Beltran Leyva cartel, which used to be part of the Sinaloa Cartel Federation, but they actually seceded from them. Wow, there's an idea. Sorry.
No. Strategically withdrawal.
Fine. But yeah, one of the elements of that particular cartel is the street gang La Mano con Hojas. They're a small cell of members within actual Mexico. There's also the other street gang, El Comando del Diablo, literally under the command of the devil. They are a hitman squad. So, but they got disbanded too. So it's different. It's interesting. Different ones that either okay, fine, strategically withdrew, or they disbanded, or they did other things. So what I'm kind of getting at is this, kind of what was mentioned earlier about it's not like a strict hierarchical thing like the state is. It's much more loose-knit, cells kind of going back and forth and so forth. Yes. That's a much better way of, even with just the Mexican cartels, not considering anybody else. Actually, and before I forget, I meant to say this earlier. Rothbard. Okay, what did Murray Rothbard have to say about organized crime? Well, believe it or not, back in the day, Murray Rothbard actually would occasionally write movie reviews. Yes, I know. Austrian economist Dr. Murray Rothbard writes movie reviews. So there's this one part from, let me get the date on this. He wrote, probably when it came out, if I had to guess right, pretty much The Godfather 1 and 2. I know, that sounds so mainstream, but bear with me. Apparently, the good doctor said something to the effect of, quote, "The key to The Godfathers and success in the mafia genre," meaning films, "is the realization and dramatic portrayal of the fact that the mafia, although leading a life outside the law, is, at its best, simply entrepreneurs and businessmen, supplying the consumers with goods and services of which they have been unaccountably deprived of by a Puritan WASP culture." White Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. That's what WASP means, for those of you who didn't know. Continuing on, this is Rothbard. Quote, "Hence the systematic violence of mafia life. Violence in the Godfather films is never engaged in for the hell of it or for random kicks. The point is that since the government, police, and courts will not enforce contracts they deem to be illegal, debts incurred in the mafia have to be enforced by violence. But the violence simply enforces the mafia's equivalent of the law. The codes of honor and loyalty, without which the whole enterprise would simply be random and pointless violence." Before I continue with Rothbard, remember those different points we've just mentioned this episode. The kind of ethical code they have, the independent justice systems, the security and defense procedure or apparatuses, and whatever else. All those other elements we've mentioned. Notice how Dr. Rothbard's tying them all together really succinctly here, by the way. Continuing on. Dr. Rothbard says, quote, "Organized crime is essentially anarcho-capitalist. A productive industry struggling to govern itself. Apart from attempts to monopolize and injure competitors, it is productive and non-aggressive. Unorganized or street crime, in contrast, is random, punkish, viciously aggressive against the innocent, and has no redeeming social feature." End quote. Now, isn't that rather fascinating?
So he's saying that organized crime has some sort of redeeming social feature, I think is the verbiage.
Yes, as opposed to your more like muggers, rapists, burglars type guys who are... Sure. That's kind of what he was kind of getting at. Now, here's another one. This one's great. Also from Rothbard. Quote, "One errant former member of the Corleone familia abases himself before the Godfather," played in the movie by Marlon Brando. So the context of this from this movie is that a certain punk has raped and brutalized his daughter. He went to the police and the courts, and the punk was at least let go, presumably by crafty ACLU-type lawyers and a soft judicial system. The distraught father now comes to Don Corleone for justice. So the Don gently upbraids the father by saying, quote, "Why didn't you come to me? Why did you go to the state?" The inference is clear. The state isn't engaged in equity and justice. To obtain justice, you must come to the familia. So finally, the Don relents. "What would you have me do?" The distraught father whispers in the Godfather's ear, No, that is too much. We will take care of him properly." So not only do we see anarcho-capitalist justice carried out, but it is clear that the Mafia Code has a nicely fashioned theory of proportionate justice. So in a world where the idea that the punishment should fit the crime has been abandoned and still struggled over by libertarian theorists, it's heartwarming to see that the Mafia has worked it out in practice, close quote. So obviously Rothbard was going by a fictional example, The Godfather. And he was going off of one scene regarding what Don Corleone was kind of saying, and he was, making some inferences. But I find that interestingly enough that he was kind of arguing that organized crime is essentially, Ancapistan. So obviously any lefties who might be hearing this would be the point at which they'd probably be freaking out.
Right, right. And if you could, you tie assassination politics into it, well, that would be kind of, or assassination markets rather. That would be definitely a form. It may not be, technical on the blockchain, but you have your assassination markets where you go to the Don, and he sends out one of his guys to do it. So I really like Rothbard's writing style. You put that in such great language. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's kind of the other thing. I mean, now I can see I can almost, I'm gonna make a prediction here. I might be wrong, but any lefty social justice warrior communist types who authoritarians, of course, not completely unlike the totalitarian fascists on the so-called right wing that they claim to be opposed to. I can totally see the pinko communist social SJW types hearing, if they ever heard this or something like this, I can totally see them trying to reply to it in the sense of, oh, all you ANCAPs are just a bunch of revolutionary mobsters. If they were smart, that would actually sound like a halfway plausible insult. But they're not that smart, are they? Because they're all obsessed with misogyny or whatever.
Yeah. So I guess let me read this last sentence of we'll close out the excerpts for this evening. Quote: "We can see that these groups are faced with similar problems to those we face, spatial, cultural, and institutional, and they have developed ways of meeting these challenges." End quote. And oh yeah, they have. They definitely have, and the longevity of these organizations shows that the way they organize, or I guess the way that things spontaneously organize. There's certainly a lot that we can learn from them as we build second realms. Obviously, again, noting that a lot of these organizations do unethical things, and obviously second realms are foundation upon autonomy and peace. So what are your closing thoughts, man?
My closing thoughts are that let me just be absolutely clear about something. I am not encouraging anybody to just run away and, go join up with, the local triads or whatever. Not saying that in the slightest. I do not want anybody to join up with the Yakuza, the Camorra, the so-called mafia, the triads, or the Guadalajara
for a lot of those,
cartel.
You'd have to be of the right ethnicity anyways, but yeah.
Well, definitely with MS-13 because they're pretty much all Hispanic, unfortunately, right? So, the organized criminal syndicates are not big on we're multiculturally sensitive as we go around and coerce people, right? Sorry, that just sounds funny. Yes, the multicultural MS-13. No, it doesn't exist. Sorry. Thanks for playing, kid. Try again, preferably not with that. That's kind of something to kind of just keep in mind, right? It's kind of like the Bloods and the Crips. Although those are street, but see, Rothbard made a distinction between the street gangs and organized crime, right? The Bloods and the Crips would be more like street gangs, and the street gangs that work with the Mexican cartels really are street gangs, as opposed to the cartels themselves, which are more like organized crime. So that would be an interesting kind of more separate look at another time, is kind of looking at the relationship between organized crime, the street gangs, and the state. Because remember, street criminals also do snitching on each other too, and on organized crime bosses too, like the kingpins and such, to the state. So that kind of unholy trifecta between the three of them: organized crime, street gangs, and the state. And seeing how the state enables the other two. I would say probably more the street criminals more often than not, because of course, if the government outlaws something, I'm sure some street criminal will think of a way on how to profit from it. Let's just be perfectly honest. And of course the organized criminals are going to be a little bit more savvy about it. Like I was mentioning earlier, like what some of the Yakuza do, where they intimidate the shareholders. I still love that one. As far as like clever forms of extortion, I suppose. But yeah, as far as closing thoughts here go, I think there's lessons to be taken from how different organized criminal syndicates conduct their businesses and such. Regarding what second realmers should kind of take away from it in terms of what to do and what not to do, it's more looking at the different criminal syndicates with an eye towards how can we make this more something that's voluntary, that actually respects the NAP and self-ownership and such, and does not rely upon the state, obviously, and doesn't even do like what the Camorra did, where they basically just took over the state or otherwise blackmailed them enough right? Obviously, obviously it would be unethical if the second realmers were to somehow coerce the first realmers, right? That would be self-defeating, and at that point, they would just become the power establishment, much like the Camorra did in Italy. That's not the goal here, right? The goal is to just do something completely different. So yeah, lessons to be taken away. There are some decent things that organized criminals have done, such as, have their independent judicial system, probably being one of their better features, to be perfectly honest. And a lot of those other things you mentioned. So actually, if you don't mind, let's run through the list one more time. So they have a parallel culture in society, least intervention policy, local autonomy, local community. Oh, that one's kind of debatable. Temporary autonomous locations. Those are the TAZs, temporary autonomous zones. Specialization, division of labor, independent internal justice systems, and then, of course, their own security and defense operations. So you look at those 8 different characteristics, and yeah, I mean, so in terms of like forming the second realm, there's got to be a way of trying to kind of take all of those 8 different elements into consideration when trying to, secure different areas and people to actually work in those different areas and such, and trade with each other and not coerce each other and so forth. And preferably do so with excellent security culture, probably being the overriding element of it all.
Right. Well said. I'm glad you ran through those again, because that kind of summarized list, without reading and, digressions and such, it really does show that there is a lot that we can learn from organized crime in building our second realms. So, anything else, man, or we get to close out?
Don't become a criminal yourself. Just take kind of the best of what organized crime has to offer and kind of really just kind of disregard their more red market activity. And whatever and let me put it this way, actually, I would say the more important types of organized criminal activity would be their more genuinely black market activity. I mean, look at how their black market businesses run. You distinguish that from the red market activities and focus more strictly on how do they make their black market businesses work and try to emulate them only to that extent, those ethical but banned activities, if you want to go that far.
There's a gulf so wide, it is not a generation gap, ladies and gentlemen. It is an innocence gap. Most of our children have bypassed their childhood. They're dealing with knowledge and subjects and feelings and urges and passions way beyond their years. And I'm going to try to take you into my childhood, not saying that we all had the same childhood, or that everybody experienced the same thing. But I'm going to tell you that now nobody in this country is experiencing what I experienced when I was young. Living in fear. Our parents weren't living in fear. No one was living in fear. It was a time of prosperity and happiness, and the complete absence of fear that I remember was a time of innocence and of falling in love and having fun and being surrounded with friends and not having to worry or be afraid, not having been threatened by violence of any kind. And we can bring that back, ladies and gentlemen. We can bring it back. I know that we can bring it back. Because all that's required is that we stop bombarding ourselves with all of these things that are not good for any of us. You see, it is absolutely imperative that we get away from the destruction of the spirit. I can tell you exactly what's wrong with this country, ladies and gentlemen. It's Hollywood. It's television. It's pornography. All we have to do is say no. All we have to do is stop purchasing the products that support the destruction of innocence.